Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John, and I help organize this group. And Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. Everything we do is free and donation based. And if you ever want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. Moore Roshi, it's very nice to see you. How are you doing?
And nice to see you too, John. It's been a while.
It's been a minute. I have a lot more hair. You have the same amount, roughly.
I actually had grown it out for 8 weeks. I was at a training where we were not permitted to shave. Uh, you don't want to see the photos. I'm
I absolutely
incredible.
do want to see the photos, but we can handle that. We can handle that offline. But do you? I asked you this last time, but things change. Do you prefer more Roshi, Meido? What's your
Tomatoes fine.
preference?
Yeah, tomatoes fine.
Meido.
Yeah.
All right.
No reason. You don't need to use a title or anything. Just tomatoes fine.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. So, all right. So, do you mind if I introduce you and sort of talk about you in the third person while you sit there having to listen to it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
If you say anything
Um,
wrong, I'll correct you.
Perfect. Great. So Meido joined us back in 2022. We were really thrilled, and I am really thrilled to have him back with us because I really enjoyed that talk. Meido is the abbot of Korenji, a Rinzai Zen Buddhist monastery in Wisconsin, as well as the guiding teacher of the international Korenji Rinzai Zen community. He is also the author of the Rinzai Zen Way, a guide to practice, as well as Hidden Zen, practices for sudden awakening and embodied realization. I will just say I don't know how deep we'll get into this. Maybe we will, but we talked about it a lot last time. I have been very struck by the open-handedness with which Meido discusses dimensions of Rinzai Zen practice and Zen practice more broadly that I don't think are widely or loudly discussed in every Zen circle. I found it really illuminating. It gave me a new perspective on what Zen practice encompasses and entails. So I hope you'll enjoy this interview and Q&A, and you should also check out his books and his videos and just anything you can get your hands on. Meido began Zen practice in 1988. He studied under three different Rinzai Zen masters, including Tenzan Toyota Rokuji. I hope I pronounced that more or less correct. And I wanted to cite this master in particular just because I noticed that in Meido's own biography, it refers to that master and says, under whom he also endured a severe training in traditional martial arts. And I like the idea of not, he undertook a training, he endured a training in martial arts.
Survived. Survived would
Yeah,
be another way to say it.
yeah, survived training in martial arts. So that's interesting. Maybe we could talk about that when you come back for the third time. But that's Meido Moore Roshi. His website is korinji.org, Korinji.org. Meido, before we get started, so you know the deal by now. You and I will have a little interview, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. But before we do that, is there anything that you'd like to say?
No, not at all. Just really happy to be with you guys and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. So, all right. So I've got some stuff I wanted to talk to you about. In our last talk, you said something really interesting. You said, I mean, a lot of things that were really interesting, but one interesting thing you said was you talked about awakening as being the start of the Zen path rather than its goal or its culmination. And you compared it in that regard to practices or traditions like Dzogchen or Mahamudra, where you sort of they describe it, I think, as taking the fruit or taking the result as the path. And you also said that in Zen practice, you try to get the student to an experience of awakening, or kensho as you called it, as quickly as possible so that they can start practicing Zen, because that's the start of Zen. Did I get that more or less right as a basis for this question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
We call Kensho or Satori are the two words we use for awakening in the Japanese Zen tradition. And they're classically described as the gate of Zen.
Hmm.
just the entrance gate. But because Zen, it's not unlike Dzogchen, is a path that takes the fruit or the result as the path itself, that's the moment when you enter that gate that we can say it's genuine Zen practice. It taking
Yeah.
awakening itself as the basis.
So this is fascinating to me because I tend to think of Buddhist practice, and I know a lot of people think of Buddhist practice as the sort of a path leading to awakening, right? And so you're saying that this is a post. Essentially, you're characterizing Zen as a post awakening practice or a post awakening practice tradition. It starts with awakening. So given that, and given this sort of throwaway comment that you made that, oh yeah, so Zen teachers try and get the student to awakening as quickly as possible so they can start doing Zen, so they can stop messing around with the kid stuff and start doing Zen. Not that those were the words you used. How do you do that? It just struck me as so casual. Like, yeah, we'll just get them to awakening really quick so they can start doing Zen. Would you be willing to share a little bit on how that? I
Yeah,
would
I
certainly
mean,
like to know how that's done.
the first thing I want to say is it's not, I wouldn't use the words kid stuff. You're right.
I'm
It's
being a
not
bit
that.
cavalier. I don't want to put those words in your mouth, certainly.
No, it's okay. It's a good thing to clarify, I think. It's not that someone who hasn't yet arrived at this thing we call awakening is not doing genuine practice or sincere practice, is not a Zen practitioner. But that experience of awakening is the moment when we can understand what practice is for. And we actually have a genuine faith arising because of experiential knowledge rather than intellectual knowledge. And it's the moment where a different kind of practice can take place because subsequently to awakening itself becomes the basis for practice. Practice essentially in its many forms is a way to revisit that, deepen it, integrate it. The long path of so-called post-awakening practice is the path of what Bodhidharma called becoming Buddha. What is Buddha? The moment of awakening is the moment where we could really start to understand that. So that's why it's so crucial. But I would never denigrate, or I would never want anyone to think that I'm denigrating or discounting practice before awakening. We all have to work with our conditions, and there's a certain kind of purification and so on that comes with those early years of practice that allows us to arrive at that, very clear insight, which later becomes the basis.
Mm.
As far as how we do it, there's no one clear answer. We have this thing in Zen called direct pointing, are the words we use. They are reminiscent of, you mentioned Dzogchen and Mahamudra. Dzogchen talks about direct introduction. Mahamudra talks about pointing out instructions. These things are not dissimilar. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but they're not dissimilar in that the way Zen expresses the methodology of the path, the relationship with the teacher is key or central. And the activity of the teacher, not only the teacher, it's not that the student is passive and the teacher somehow zaps you and awakens you, but the
Mm.
activity of the teacher in alignment with or in conjunction with the sincere practice of the student creates a certain set of conditions by which a ripeness can start to emerge. And the possibility of awakening becomes much greater.
Mhm.
At some point, finally, it sometimes is the direct pointing activity of the teacher, a word, an action. If you read the old Zen books, you'll read stories of people hitting each other with sticks and so on. Those things have a function vis-a-vis bringing about awakening. So Zen is a tradition, not unlike the other ones you mentioned, where that student-teacher relationship is considered not just a support, but key or central. And
Mm.
it's within that human relationship, through the activities of body, speech, and mind, that the sort of ripeness can be brought about, and that entry we call awakening, Kensho or Satori, can more easily be arrived at.
Mm. Yeah, and I appreciate the clarification. I mean, it is there's something there's something very potent in this sort of assertion that uh, that awakening is the start of Zen practice. But I appreciate your clarifying that the sort of force of that assertion doesn't necessarily entail a sort of denigration or a belittling of pre-awakening
Right. I mean,
activity or
really,
practice.
it's the start of Zen practice. It's also the end of Zen practice. It's also the middle of Zen practice. Resting upon the teaching that there is an intrinsic or inherent quality of
Yeah,
wisdom, of awakening. So naturally, we can say intellectually, that means there's nothing for me to gain. There's nothing for me outside of me I need to look for. That's true. Doesn't mean I've actualized that yet.
right.
Just knowing that intellectually is not enough. But awakening is that moment where that teaching becomes real to us, not just an intellectual concept, but a lived experience of my own intrinsic Buddhahood.
Hmm.
And then, because knowing that or having that lived experience is also still not the same as fully actualizing it, we have a path after that to
Yes.
continuously revisit it and deepen it. So I think people can understand that pretty easily. It's not too complicated, but there can be a kind of overemphasis on awakening or an attachment to it that will lead people sometimes to think that they need to exhaust themselves searching for something, or to think that until they've arrived at that clear experience verified by the teacher that they're worthless or that their practice is no good. And all of that couldn't be farther from the truth. Uh, I really want to stress that that pre-awakening practice is as much awakening as the post-awakening practice. We just don't know it yet.
Yeah. Could you talk about, by the way, very impressed with the meticulous use of farther versus further. I saw you be
I'm
like, no, no,
extremely
no,
jet lagged.
farther. That's we're talking
I,
physical distance. Okay. Okay.
I'm extremely jet lagged right now, so I apologize in advance for all of my probably over verbosity and also mistakes. There's going to be a
um,
lot.
I'm loving everything that's going on so far, so I have no critiques for you. I'm wondering though, could you talk in kind of a brass tacks type way about what the pre-awakening practice of a Zen student would look like, at least in your lineage? So I understand that it's all held within the sort of container of the student-teacher relationship and the encounters with the teacher. You're describing that as incredibly important and maybe just central. Uh, but you also described it as being as the student having work to do as well, not just in their engagement with the teacher, but practice and so on to sort of ripen themselves perhaps for that, to make themselves fit or receptive to that direct pointing so that they could receive what's being pointed. Can you talk about um, what that practice actually entails in sort of concrete ways?
Sure. Now, first thing I want to say is you mentioned the student-teacher relationship being central and being so important as I stressed. What I usually say, and I'll say it now, that is true in Zen originally. I think Rinzai Zen especially preserves this approach. That is true to the point that we would not say even that Zazen or meditation is the central practice.
Hmm.
I think most people, when they think of Zen, they think of people sitting in meditation, Zazen, as the end all and the be all, the main method. And it's true, Zen people do a lot of it.
It's what the
Now,
word Zen means, isn't it?
yeah, well,
Originally.
yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean the act of meditation, but it means that absorption
Hmm.
or that cultivation, yeah. Which can be done in many activities and is done in many activities, of course, has to be done in many activities other than just sitting. But if we talk about the Rinzai Zen path in particular, I will say that if I have to name what the one indispensable practice is, the one central practice is, it's not necessarily Zazen, seated meditation. It's what we call Sanzen. Sanzen is the word translates something like going to for Zen or visiting for Zen. In other words, the encounter with the teacher. Another word we use for one form of Sanzen is Dokusan. If someone's a Zeni, they will know that word. It's that time, especially during retreats, when you go in to visit with your teacher and so on. But I have to say, if you ask me, what's the one practice that's indispensable? It's Sanzen. And in original Zen, I'm sorry, I'll go off on a tangent here for a moment, but in original Zen, before the Koan system was invented, even before the monastic system was invented, talking of Bodhidharma in China and those early ancestors, uh, even up until the time of Rinzai, before there was such a systematized training method as we have now, um, it seems to be there are indications that uh, the gist of the Zen path was, if you were a monk or nun, was traveling to visit a master. And in that first initial encounter, through the activity of the teacher and the ripeness of one's own cultivation, either you got it or you didn't.
Hmm.
There are many stories of someone having that initial encounter and not catching it
Mm-hmm.
and being told to go someplace else, or the idea being, well, this might not be my karmic affinity is such that this might not be the teacher for me, so I better go find another one. That encounter was everything. We don't read a lot about people that they were doing meditation, don't get me wrong, but sitting for years in a monastery, unless that flint and steel met right at the beginning and created a spark.
Hmm.
So I think that stress on the actualization of awakening within encounter is so key that it cannot be overstressed. It's something a lot of people are not aware of, which is why I'm sort of belaboring the point right now.
Yeah. And so are you saying, because you know I've heard similar stories in the Dzogchen tradition, in which I spent a fair amount of time early in my practice. They talk about Milarepa, the great Tibetan saint, how he, during his quest to find a teacher or to find the Dharma, he encountered a teacher. I may be butchering this; it's been a few years, but he encountered a teacher who said, "Oh, in my practice, you don't have to do anything at all." I think he encountered a Dzogchen teacher essentially, and the teacher said something like, if you I forget what he said. It's there's nothing you need to do. You're a Buddha automatically through this practice, or you do this practice for 1 second in the daytime, you're a Buddha in the daytime. You do it 1 second in the nighttime, you're Buddha in the nighttime. So I'm messing it up, but something like that. And basically, Milarepa it missed him, right? Like it didn't. He kind of just took it as like, oh, I don't have to do anything, and so he didn't do anything. Nothing happened. There was no awakening. There was no he wasn't sort of ripe for it. And it was only when he found his true teacher Marpa and studied Mahamudra and other techniques from him that he found the teaching that was right for him. So I hear sort of an echo of what you're describing, which I think just reinforces the kinship in some ways between these traditions.
Oh,
But
yeah.
my Dzogchen teacher also said that if you receive the pointing out instruction, but you haven't been practicing on your own, you haven't been. There is more emphasis perhaps in that tradition on sitting meditation, and if you haven't been doing the various preparatory and preliminary practices that Dzogchen teachers prescribe, which involves a bunch of stuff, prostrations and various visualization yogas and so forth, as well as sitting meditation. If you haven't been doing those, it's like you haven't built up like this the candlestick of your candle. There's no wax there, and there's no wick, and so there's nothing for the flame to alight on. It sounds like you are saying, and forgive me if I'm overstating it, that you could almost do nothing but have encounters with the teacher, and if you do that um, persistently enough and look for the right teacher that's the fit for you, that alone can be a complete Rinzai path to awakening. Am I hearing that right? Like you kind of don't need to
It,
build you don't need to build up the wick and the wax with other practices. It that is complete, self-complete.
the thing is, there's no fixed answer to that because everyone's conditions are different. Um, but well, I'll give you an example. I mean, your example of Milarepa is a great one. And that's how I heard that story as well, too. This is the great Milarepa. And his first encounter with the Dzogchen master, he didn't catch it. And he had to go sit his butt off in a cave under Marpa, right?
Eating
My experience
nettles.
with Dzogchen, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. When I was in India and Nepal in the late 80s, I met Toko Urgyen Rinpoche, who was a great Dzogchen master, one of the greats.
Yeah.
And he knocked my socks off. He came out from retreat just to speak to me. I had about a half hour just to speak with him face to face. And I don't know what he did to me, but he did something. And
Mm.
I remember distinctly that feeling, but I had no idea what it was. I didn't recognize it for what it was. I had no way to sustain it.
Yeah.
I had no inclination to try and follow him. It was something that went like this. Even with the depth of what I experienced, I knew there was something there, but it didn't catch. And it was only when I later met some particular Zen teachers, Zen masters of mine, and did a certain amount of practice and had the same experience, even using some of the same methodology,
Mm.
which was really fascinating. And then they verbally said to me, "This is what I just did. This is what you're experiencing." I remembered, oh crap. That's what happened to me back in the late 80s, but I
Yeah.
wasn't ready for it. So the conditions have to align. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't say that encounter is necessarily the complete path, but I would say let's just say that it's central, it's indispensable.
Hmm.
And that points to the fact that Buddha Dharma as a whole, whatever tradition we're talking about, has always been transmitted in human relationship. It's always something that requires one to practice underneath the guidance of others. Shakyamuni talks about that in the sutras as well. So that so-called transmission between living beings
Mm.
is what's important. When we talk about lineage, for example, lineage of Zen teaching or lineage of Dzogchen teaching, there's no such thing. I mean, it's an idea, it's a nice idea, but the lineage doesn't exist. The people are dead. What exists is only the living human body, mind, where the teachings are alive. So unless we connect with that and become that ourselves, the lineage itself doesn't exist, completely dead. Zen awakening only exists in a living body.
Yeah.
So that's why that relationship's so important. Yeah. So I can't overstress it. I guess I probably am. But to your question of how do we make that happen, this thing we call direct pointing, there's no fixed answer. There is, or there are oral instructions given to teachers regarding some so-called methods of direct pointing, but we cannot say that they fit everyone.
Hmm.
There is, however, something that comes out in practice. We use the Japanese word myo, which means sort of wondrous or miraculous. There's a clear seeing and a spontaneity of action that comes out. Um, if a student is in a particular condition, and if the teacher thinks, oh, in that deep samadhi condition, classically, this is a moment we might hit them on the arm with a stick because that will shatter the samadhi, possibly lead them to an awakening experience. Looks like they're in that condition. Maybe I should hit them right now. If the teacher's thinking this way, it's completely wrong.
Yeah. Got it.
There's a spontaneity and an instant perception that leads to an action of body, speech, or mind. This thing we call direct pointing.
Yeah.
We can
You
say it's
can't you can't
genuine.
reverse engineer it. You
You
can't.
can't reverse engineer it and you can't overthink it. It can't be coming from your intellectual analysis of the student. It has to be coming from a deeper place. So,
Yeah.
as far as what all students do, I said Zazen's not the central thing, but Zazen is an unmatched practice for developing this state of meditative absorption we call Samadhi. And Samadhi itself is not awakening, although we will realize very clearly later the unity of Samadhi and awakening. But Samadhi itself is just a human thing. It can be cultivated in any activity, in any tradition. Many traditions do it. What's useful about it for us is in the Samadhi state, that state of meditative absorption, which things like Zazen cultivate, our habitual self-reification, our self-referential way of seeing, what we call dualistic seeing and so on, habitual subject-object seeing, is a little more permeable. We can start to put it down a little bit. So while that itself is not awakening, I will say all Zen students, whether they do it through Zazen, most do, and then learn to extend that into other activities, or whether they do it through just other activities, they have to cultivate this thing we call samadhi. And that samadhi is what becomes that wick, or I should say the wax of the
Yeah.
candle. It's the condition where when awakening happens, it can be sustained, it can be recognized, it can be
Mm.
sustained. If awakening is something that happens in one instant, samadhi is how we can extend that through so-called time.
Right.
And by doing so, start to inhabit that and eventually bring all of our activities into accord with it.
Mm.
So we usually say if someone arrives at awakening and they've done no practice before, it happens. It happens not uncommonly. The sixth patriarch in Zen is famous for that. Uh, but if you haven't done samadhi cultivation before awakening, you'll have to do it after because it's the only way to sustain the face of it and to deepen it and so on.
Mm.
So encounter with the teacher is essential. Please sit a lot anyway.
Yeah.
Please do a lot of sitting, and you will have all your bases covered basically.
Hmm.
I hope
That's
that all
really
makes sense.
fascinating, and just continuing to see the parallels because I haven't studied in Zen, but I have studied in Dzogchen, and just seeing those parallels, like the way Toku Urgyen would talk about the recognition of the nature of mind as being like ringing a bell. You can't you can't keep ringing it. Like if you hit it again, you'll just stop the ringing. You just have to let it ring out. But how long it rings out before you lose it is a function of something. I don't know if he specified what, but it sounds like you're saying the cultivation of samadhi is what allows the sustaining of the.
Yeah. You know the words shamatha and vipassana, I'm sure.
Sure.
You know, shamatha, that kind of deeply relaxed. Sometimes people use the word focus, but it's a sort of a calmness or cessation,
Hmm.
and vipassana being the clear insight. We don't use those words so much in the Zen tradition. We talk rather about samadhi and prajna. We use
Mm-hmm.
that kind of terminology, meditative absorption and liberative wisdom. But we can say this way: Kensho, Satori, awakening, is the complete fulfillment of vipassana, of insight.
Right.
But samadhi is the complete fulfillment of shamatha. If you don't have both, the bell will ring once and then stop,
Yeah.
and you might not hear it again. If you only have the samadhi side, you've got great serenity and calmness, but no insight. It's only in the unity of samadhi and prajna that the fulfillment of shamatha and vipassana can be realized. And that's very much the Zen approach. The Platform Sutra is a great text where, coining the sixth patriarch teases that out, what those words mean. I
Hmm.
recommend that for anyone who's interested.
I actually haven't read it, but I'm gonna grab it now. Um, all right. Is it okay if we switch gears? I could go down this rabbit hole forever with you about the
Yeah,
nature of
obviously I can too, but
yeah.
I'd rather not
We'll
lecture you
spare
guys.
we'll spare the viewers and
This
listeners.
is religious studies nerd talk. I'm sorry, guys.
That's right. By the way, I will just say one last thing, which is, the Dzogchen teacher I was referring to who talked about the candle, etc. That was my teacher. That was Tulku Urgyen's son, Sokni Rinpoche.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I never met him, but I practiced for a little bit when I was there under Chokinima Rinpoche. So
Mm-hmm.
same family. Yeah.
Yeah, whom I haven't met, but one day maybe, hopefully.
He was my refuge teacher, actually.
Chogi Nima was.
Yeah, yeah, my
Oh wow.
refuge teacher was a Tibetan master, actually.
Hmm. He gave you a name, a Tibetan name, and everything.
Yep.
Cut a
Yep.
lock of hair.
No, no, this was just like what we would call jukai or zaike tokudo, like a lay thing. I didn't have to
Hmm.
cut. Well, actually, my hair was already cut, so maybe that's why.
Ah. Yeah, they gave me the snip. They just took like one piece. Um, yeah, gave me the name and everything. That's funny. Um, yeah, Choi Nima is incredible. But all right, I want to ask you a slightly different question. I When we talk about Zen, we talk so much about awakening. We talk about it seems like it's really focused on just sort of ways of being. And it's almost, even as I reach for how to describe it, its main characteristic seems to be that it's ineffable, that you can't really fully put words to what Zen is pointing towards. And so a lot, it seems like seeing your true nature, seeing the mind, right? I think in the four phrases, one of them is about sort of pointing directly at the mind or something like that, right? I'm probably butchering that as well.
That's right.
Um, but so in the early Buddhist tradition, and the sort of Theravadan, the latter day Theravadan tradition that at least to a large extent tries to preserve that early Buddhist tradition, it's much more cut and dried. The Buddha of the early Pali Suttas said, I teach two things, suffering and the end of suffering. And everything is all about suffering in the end and its end, the sort of wrongness or unsatisfactoriness that seems to pervade existence and what can be done about it. I don't hear that discussed as much in Zen. And look, I'm certainly not saying that it's never discussed. I don't have the knowledge to say that. I doubt that, frankly. But it doesn't seem to be stressed. I don't think in our last talk we discussed this idea of dukkha or suffering, maybe at all. And so, what I'm wondering is in Zen practice, is the end of suffering or liberation from suffering still an end to which seeing your true nature is a means? Or is seeing your true nature the end and not really so concerned with whether you're suffering or not, right? And maybe Zen's relationship with the question of suffering is just very different from, say, the Theravadas. Does that make sense as a
Yeah, no,
question?
I don't think it's different at all. I mean, Zen is straight up Buddhism, and uh, because it's coming out from a Mahayana movement, it tends to stress some different things. For example, we tend to talk about the paramitas rather than the Eightfold Path.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also kind of an assumption, Zen originally being a monastic tradition, that someone who's coming to that practice has that basic background already. So that's one reason why it's not discussed as much, perhaps. We have the agamas, the equivalent of the Pali Canon we have in
Right.
the Chinese canon, right? So we have that material, but as a practice or a yogic focused tradition rather than a scholastic one or an intellectual one, um, Zen is pretty pointed, going for the jugular. When we don't necessarily get into a lot of analysis the way some other traditions do. But that being said, if one did not have extreme suffering and existential angst, I don't know why they would do the practice. It doesn't
Okay.
make sense. It's a difficult practice. Certainly, that's what brought me to it. And anyone I know who's a Zen practitioner came to it because of that. Um, Awakening is not different in essence or content from what Shakyamuni experienced under the Bodhi tree. It is most often different in depth and completeness. It's possible for someone to have a satori or kensho, which is so all-encompassing that they're done. The path of liberation is accomplished as classically understood in Buddhist traditions. The circle of rebirth is ended, and so on.
Yeah.
But for most people, that's not what happens. They have some taste or glimpse of it, and then they have to practice more to deepen it their whole lives. Because that is most often the case in Dzogchen too,
Mm-hmm.
Mahamudra to other traditions as well. That's why we have such a stress on, okay, what to do next, what to do next, now do this, rather than lingering upon questions of dukkha, the Four Noble Truths and so on. We kind of take those things as a given.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that might be what you're sensing, but it certainly doesn't mean those things are lacking.
Mm-hmm.
As we now know, the Pali Canon is not the earliest canon. It doesn't really have a claim to being earlier than Mahayana Sutras.
Right.
What's amazing and wondrous about it is it's the only complete canon that's preserved in an Indic language. That's remarkable. But even when the roots of what we now call Theravada Buddhism were arising, there were also Mahayana people hanging around, and they were having the same kind of discourse and with different emphases and different directions of analysis and so on. So I would never say any of those traditions lack anything. But Zen tends to, as I said, go for the jugular. What's the most rapid, most direct way to cut through it now?
Mm.
And that will almost never be an intellectual analysis of dukkha, for example, or it will almost never be things we find in the Theravada tradition, like antidote practices, for example, contemplating the foulness of the female form in order to cut through your desire if you're a monk. We have those practices in Zen classically, but we don't stress them because from the Zen standpoint, it's not the most direct path.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean they're lesser, and the most direct path is not the most direct if it doesn't fit you,
Right.
right? But there's different emphases do not mean different essence of point or direction, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And so you are saying it, to just like send your words back to you to make sure that I understand them. You are saying that Zen Buddhism is also about suffering and liberation from
It's
suffering.
about liberation from samsaric wandering, about liberation from the cycle of rebirth. It's Buddhism, straight up. Now, that doesn't always jibe with the desire, some folks desire to have something that expresses more modernity or sort of deconstructs the original teachings and is perhaps something that's more in line with physical materialism or something like that. There are many sort of intellectual and philosophical trends in the modern world that don't fit with the Buddhist analysis of the human situation. But Zen is not one of them. Some Zen teachers may be. I cannot speak for all Zen people. But if I
Right.
speak about Zen as a tradition, it's straight up Buddhism 101, but one that is especially focused on the yogic understanding of practice and seeking the most direct way, using and harnessing the body to accomplish the path in this lifetime, not to wait for a future result.
And so you don't seem like someone who would shy away from saying uh, that a Zen practitioner is aspiring to accomplish something. There's sometimes where I've had experiences where I talk to a Zen practitioner and it's like trying to punch a ghost, you know?
No gaining mind, right? They'll scold you for having gaining mind if you're seeking
Well
anything.
there can be a sort of, I don't want to critique, and this certainly isn't a critique of the tradition, but you can get this sense where it's like they almost want to one up your, like, you'd be like, okay, so when you practice, but what is practice? Well, when you sit down, what is down? It's like, just can we talk? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, and so
this is
there
fake
is there.
internet Zen, basically.
It's like they read the Heart Sutra a few too many times, and now there's no anything, and you can never talk about anything ever.
It's
And
intellectual false Zen, and there's a lot of it around there, or a lot of it around, I should say. Um, yeah, what can I say? It's an embarrassment when people talk that way, seemingly representing the Zen school. But we have that kind of problem in Buddhism in general, in the
mhm,
West, you know, because Buddhism is a yogic practice. It's something that your body and mind have to be the rubber that hits the road. There's no getting around practice and exhaustive practice. Even a tradition like Dzogchen, which says, just as Zen does, there's nothing really to accomplish. Everything is
mhm.
originally unarisen and unborn. There's nothing you need to attain. How much do they practice?
Yeah.
A lot, because it's the only way to make those words true, to actualize those teachings. But people who talk on and on about Zen in that kind of sort of flippant and intellectual way, basically they're not practitioners. And I don't mean to sound cruel. I would like them to be, but it's safe to discount that kind of stuff. It's nonsense.
So then, would you? So if you like, what is so when someone takes up Zen practice, there is a goal. Now that doesn't mean, we talked about this last time too. That doesn't mean that while they're practicing, they need to be striving, straining, grasping for the goal. But you can still have an aspiration. There can be a direction in which you're aiming yourself. There's a reason you're doing this, one assumes.
Yeah, the
And
four vows.
and so what is, oh, I was going to say, what is the reason? What is it that a Zen practitioner, if you were to imagine sort of an ideal Zen practitioner who's really oriented in the direction of Zen, the direction that Zen is pointing, what is their aspiration? Why are they doing it? What are they aspiring to accomplish? What's the goal? What's the purpose?
Well, at the beginning of Zen, like the beginning of all Mahayana paths, even though Zen doesn't consider itself common Mahayana or necessarily bound by it, just like Dzogchen. But the beginning of all Mahayana paths is the arising of what we call Bodhaishin or Bodhicitta, which is the
Mm-hmm.
aspiration for liberation, not only for oneself, but not only for oneself, for others. The four Bodhisattva vows: vow to liberate all beings, I vow to cut off all of my delusion, I vow to master all the Dharma gates, I vow to attain Buddhahood. The goal of Zen is Buddhahood, nothing less. It's liberation as classically understood in Zen. It does not reject that, and it accepts the Buddhist analysis of the human situation.
Mm.
That being said, we deconstruct even those things when it's useful to do so, but that doesn't mean we don't negate them. We don't put them down. Um, Shen Yang, who's a great Chinese Zen master, Chan master.
Mm.
He was a person I did my first Zen retreats under. Very fortunate for that.
In New York
The
City,
question came up.
right?
Huh?
Queens?
Yeah, yeah, at the on Corona Avenue, the Zen Center there. It's where I met Guogu, a well-known teacher who's a friend of mine. Um, at one retreat I was at, someone asked him this question. Zen Chan, I'll say Zen, says that there's nothing really to gain. We're all intrinsically Buddha already. Uh, but it seems like there's a lot of gaining minds. So other people are striving for some kind of goal. Like, how do you reconcile this with practice? What should I be doing when I practice? And he said, listen, of course, when you're a practitioner, you want your life to be better. You want to develop positive qualities. You want to cut through your delusion. You want to attain awakening. You want to help other beings. Of course, you have to have those goals. And of course, when you sit down on the cushion and practice your method, you're not thinking about those goals. You're throwing yourself completely into the method. There's no conflict between those two.
Mm.
The orientation has to be in line with the Bodhisattva path, or we cannot call it Zen. When I sit down to do Zen practice, I'm not thinking about the Bodhisattva path. I'm throwing myself, body and mind, with all of my might, into the practice method my teacher has given me. There's nothing else. With great faith, with great abandon. If we can balance those two things, I should say they're not in conflict. They don't really need to be balanced. So as long as we don't set them up as conflicting with one another,
Yeah.
then the path becomes very clear. The practice starts to verify and seal for us the bodhisattva aspiration. The bodhisattva aspiration starts to fuel the path. These two wheels start spinning together in this a remarkable way. It's a kind of a fake conflict. To my mind, it doesn't exist in the Zen tradition at all. But again, it's something that arises out of this kind of faux intellectual Zen that we see mostly in online forums, not so much in places where people are actually practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. There is just like a special uh I don't know, a vibe. There's some sort of sociological phenomenon that arises in an online forum where people are talking about Dharma. It's very interesting, but no, but I really appreciate this clarification. Even though I'm not a Zen practitioner, this is resonating very powerfully with me. This idea of simultaneous simultaneously holding an aspiration, and then when you're in your practice, there's nothing but your practice. There's no aspiration, there's no goal, there's just the practice. I
Yeah, the
like the
aspiration is the map.
yeah.
The practice is the walking,
Mm.
and you need both. That's all. Maybe that's a useful
You're
symphony.
very good at this.
I'm a good talker, huh? Right?
You've done this before, haven't
Let
you?
me know if I become one of those insufferable Zen people.
Doesn't seem
What
to
is
be
good?
happening.
Is there good?
Yeah, right. What even is this? Okay, this was amazing. I don't want to monopolize any more of your time. I think we should open it up to Q&A. I will say one more small thing. It's not a question. I just want to acknowledge something about the Zen tradition that I don't think I've said before, and I think needs to be recognized. I don't hear it said too often. I don't know if you're a music fan, Meido, but I do feel that Zen is by far the most metal of all the traditions. I just when I hear like the chants and just the Zen writings, they're so metal, like they're so badass. Like Dogen's admonition, let me respectfully remind you, right? Life and death are of supreme importance. Oh my God. Or the four vows, right? Beings are numberless. I vow to save all of them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to exhaust them. That is incredibly metal. So I just want to sort of tip my hat to the Zen tradition for being like an incredibly cool and metal, hardcore tradition. So do with that what you will.
I
Um,
don't mind that. I don't
okay,
mind that.
good. Let's do Q&A. So is that okay, Mado?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Caroline, um, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Meido, thank you so much for being here. I recently took refuge in the Chan tradition at Dharma Drum. And so
Oh,
so that was really cool. I didn't know you studied. So my question is, if you feel like sharing, what is your current method for your own practice, if that's okay for me to ask?
yeah, it's certainly okay to ask. Um, One of the things that I have to do as a teacher is, of course, guide others. So I am part of that in the Rinzai tradition is using this method we call Koan training. So that's one aspect of my training because I have the position of of meeting the students in the interview room and doing the koan training or administering it for them, it forces me to go through each of those koans again and again. And I find that the encounter with the student deepens my own understanding of each of those continuously. So in that sense, the koan practice never finishes. And I can say that I probably really penetrated it most deeply when I started doing it with students, as opposed to when I was doing it as a student. So that's fascinating for me. The other thing I would say is that there is, okay, if we talk about Rinzai Zen, we have these methods like koan practice, and people tend to focus on method. But I think what's not widely understood is that the so-called practice curriculum in our tradition serves to point out many other methods that are not necessarily well known. There's a point in koan practice, for example, where what becomes clarified is what we call the practice of Hokkyo Zanmai, the jewel mirror samadhi, kind of a meditative absorption in which everything one encounters, so-called inside or outside, is precisely the face of one's own nature. Okay, that sounds wonderful. It's a very intellectual way to say it. But there's a point in the practice where it becomes clear what that means, what that lived experience is. And then there's a secret oral instruction in the tradition. It's not so secret, I'm telling you now, where the teacher tells the student, now that that's clear, you're continuing your koan practice, but now secretly for 3 years, practice the Hokkyo Zanmai, the jewel mirror samadhi. Means in every moment of every day, in every activity, you are sustaining the face of that absorption or attempting to. So that kind of thing, which the practice points out, we cannot say it's really bound by method. There's a point where the practice itself becomes methodless, or becomes, every activity, everything we encounter, every so-called phenomena is pregnant with that potentiality of causing one to experience that insight again, because everything itself is the flesh of the Dharmakaya Buddha. Everything itself is that suchness. So there's a kind of practice that comes out in the more advanced stages, or later stages, I should say, where I cannot really say what the practice is, because it doesn't take a fixed form, but the content or the essence of it is that deepening of awakening, which I've been talking about. I guess I would say that that's my practice is like that. Those two things. One is dealing with the students, working on fundamentals, whether it's breath counting, koan training, causes me to continuously deepen my own understanding of those. But second is that kind of a formless or unfixed practice, which was pointed out through the path of my training, which I'm striving as my own continued training to sustain and to deepen and to maintain. And I succeed sometimes, I fail sometimes. That stage of training is described as being like a dragon. If you've ever seen paintings of a dragon, East Asian dragon, they're often chasing after or holding a jewel, a wondrous jewel. So that stage of training is described as being like the dragon, sometimes catching it, sometimes losing it, but still wrestling through the sky with this wish-fulfilling jewel. I guess, I'm more like a small lizard than a dragon, but I'm doing something like that, trying to integrate everything into practice. And if we can do that, the great hope of that is it doesn't matter if you're ordained or lay, it doesn't matter what your profession or life activity is, any of it can become that most profound practice. That's the great, wondrous hope of that transition to the formless practice, the lived practice. So that's my ambition. That's what I'm working on. I'm not claiming any great success, but if you ask me what I'm doing, one of my teachers describing his experience of that kind of practice, he was talking about bookcases. He was making bookcases at home, making them himself. And his experience of a seamless non-separation from the materials as he's working with them, almost tasting the wood as he's working on it, inhabiting the space where there's no so-called self and other, and yet clearly there's self and a bookcase being made, and a non-conflict between those two, playing. I guess you can call it a kind of play, the samadhi of play, are words that we use in the Zen tradition. I'm trying to play. How's that?
That's beautiful.
Is that okay? That's an answer.
Works for me. Thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate it. And thanks for coming back to Sit Heads.
You're very welcome. Are you, if I can ask you briefly, are you training at Dharma Drum in New York?
Yeah, I go on retreats there, uh,
Lovely.
on at the retreat center upstate.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, never been there. Great. Wish you the best in your training.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Meido. Sean, go ahead. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little on like what happens with Koan practice. I
Go
just
on.
have like this vague idea that you're like contemplating some sort of like, abstract question and something
Sure.
happens, but like what the experience is like of practicing that.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess it's easy to misunderstand that practice, and there are some books out there which really misrepresent it too, which we have to be careful about. But if I say what a koan is, I mean, we have this classical literature coming out from China and Japan called koans, and most often they're records of the sayings and doings of various masters and their students, and they're taken up in meditation, in samadhi, in a state of meditative absorption, uh, as a way to break through to insight. But I can talk about them from two standpoints, which hopefully will clarify it. One is that koan, especially in the beginning stages of that training, the purpose is to fan into flame your own natural questioning. So I mentioned existential angst as a motivation for this kind of practice. All of us have that at some point in our lives, perhaps sometimes more than others. But in the beginning of koan practice, the purpose of it is to give some form to that questioning and to make it the focus of your practice such that it becomes inescapable. You can no longer dilute it, avoid it, numb it, create distractions to stay away from it. The practice itself is putting your face into that and causing it to consume you. And that brings about a very remarkably focused, it can be not pleasant practice, but a very focused, very crystalline, cold, clear kind of state, which is very ripe for insight. And, the example in the Buddha's lifetime, of course, he was so haunted by questions of existence after recognizing transience and the inevitability of death and so on, that he couldn't stay where he was. He had a new child left. Can you imagine being so consumed by existential angst that you're driven to do something like that? All of us have something like that, even if it's not quite that strong. So koan training is a way to bring that to the fore. And by doing so, again, not only do we make some conditions that are ripe for insight, but we cut through a lot of bullshit also. It clarifies what's important for our lives. There was this literature, koan literature I mentioned, but a well-known, or I should say a common koan that we give in the Rinzai practice tradition as a first koan for people is simply the question, who am I? Or what am I? Or what is this? How do you answer such a question? Who am I? Or who are you even before your parents were born? What is your original face before your parents were born? That's a question the sixth patriarch asked. We could say it as what is your original nature? Who are you? What are you? Even before the Big Bang, what are you? There's no way to answer that kind of question intellectually. You can try, of course, and the teacher will promptly discount your answer. But it's a way to cut off the usual dualistic, analytical, subject-object way of viewing existence and be returned again and again to that pool, that well of extreme angst, which becomes like a rocket fuel for the practice. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing I want to say about it is this. Okay, now returning to like kind of classical koan literature. I'll give you an example. Famous koan. Monk asked the great master Tozan, what is Buddha? And Tozan answered, 3 pounds of flax. Okay, flax, linen. Okay, if you take that kind of story on a surface level, not as a practitioner, but just as a verbal story, and you analyze it. Well, I guess what Tozan is saying is that everything is Buddha, even flax. Or maybe at that moment, Tozan was sorting some flax or had a pile of flax in front of him. So he's saying, this is Buddha, everything's Buddha. That's okay as far as it goes, but that kind of answer does not cut through us and has no power to change us or liberate us at all. However, when we take up that kind of question in samadhi, in the state of meditative absorption that's cultivated through Zen practice, we don't sit there and analyze it mentally or intellectually, conceptually, but we breathe it with the whole body. We find a way, it's a very mysterious process, but we find a way to actually arrive at or enter into the state that Tozan himself was in when he said those words. And that's the purpose of Koan training. It's not to puzzle out some meaning or answer from the words that are recorded, but to arrive at the same condition of the person who said them. Tozan said 3 pounds of flax when asked what is Buddha. Bodhidharma, when asked what is the central or main principle of the Buddha Dharma, said vast emptiness, no holiness. Again, at that moment, our mind immediately wants to analyze, well, what does he mean? Oh, emptiness, I know that that's a Buddhist teaching and nothing's holy, transcending the pure and the impure. That's cool. It's not the point at all. What was the condition, the lived experience of Bodhidharma at the moment those words came from his mouth? There's a way in koan practice, if we practice in this in the embodied manner, using body, breath, and mind in unity, not just mind, this yogic way, which is the Zen way, there's a way to penetrate that and to arrive at a place where you see through the same eyes as Bodhidharma. So I'm sorry to go on at such length, but I guess those are the two things I would want to say in the beginning. One is it's a way to really fan to flame that original questioning which we all have. I mean, there's only one koan, really. What the hell? What is this? Really, what is it? So koan training is a way to do that. But more so, I would say it's a way for us to arrive at a lived experience that is in unity with the great masters of the past, whose words are recorded in the koans. In his famous commentary to the first koan in Mumon, great master Mumon said, if you penetrate this barrier, this koan, you will be eyebrow to eyebrow with the masters. Your eyebrow hairs will entangle with theirs. That's how close you will be. It's a lovely image. But it's true. It's really true. In that state of meditative absorption, there's a kind of deep penetration, even of language, which can happen. We say Zen is beyond intellectualization and transcends words and letters and is beyond language. We use a hell of a lot of language in Zen, but there's a way to interface with language which is not primarily conceptual. There's a way for it to strike more deeply. Koan training points to that. But those are two things that come to mind. I could say a lot more, but something like that. I hope that's useful or interesting at least.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right. Thank you, Sean. And thank you, Meido. Chappelle, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. Hey, Meido.
Hey, Chappelle.
So I think you spoke to it in the last question, and particularly I wanted to ask you about samadhi and its necessity in the practice, because I'm kind of thinking, how can anyone sustain doing a koan practice for like years and years on end without that kind of samadhi? Or even more so, do you feel like samadhi makes someone like rock a koan faster, or like if you have more samadhi, you're able to penetrate the koan faster, or does it not matter?
I mean, samadhi, again, I would always recommend folks to read the Platform Sutra. If you can get a good translation, these things are really teased out well. But in it, the great master Einor Huineng describes the true meditation as the unity of samadhi and prajna. True meditation is a state in which samadhi, the depth of samadhi is sustained, but it's leavened with, or there's an upwelling of liberative insight throughout it. And those two in unity essentially are the state of what we call Buddha. But that being said, okay, that's a grandiose thing to say, and it's far beyond the capacity of most of us. Samadhi is not so mysterious, really. we all have the experience of it, whether we know it or not. If there was ever a time in your life where you were so absorbed in something that you sort of forgot yourself a little bit or lost track of time, people can go into samadhi watching a movie that they're really into. People go into samadhi doing athletics, doing art, having sex, anything which, consumes the body-mind's attention in a one-pointed way. You can find yourself in that state of samadhi where our usual manner of seeing, where I'm in here and the universe is out there, starts to break down a little bit, becomes more permeable. So Zen recognizes it just as a human thing, but the practices are meant to cultivate it. I would call it samadhi vis-a-vis Zen practice as the field within which Zen cultivation takes place. It's the basis, or it's the backdrop for Zen cultivation. And the reason is not only because it will help us to sustain the face of our insight in the future, but it dissolves obstructions. It makes that self-referential way of seeing a little more permeable. It's a state in which we find our usual afflictive emotions and delusions arising a little less or being less strong. So it's not that samadhi is always required to have insight, but as I said, it's an unmatched way to create the conditions for it, or to arrive at the ripeness for it. It's not a difficult thing to cultivate. I think typically the first method that we give students in the Rinzai tradition is called Susokokan, which is a breath counting practice. It's an unmatched way to develop samadhi in zazen. But even then, we have to understand how to do it correctly. If we are setting up the breath as a mental object that I'm observing and counting, you will not develop the correct samadhi. If you, rather than counting the breath, you breathe the count with your whole body, mind in unity, you will spontaneously go into samadhi. I don't know if you can catch the difference between those two ways of saying counting the breath or breathing the count. It's quite different if you can catch that. When that samadhi starts to manifest, we don't need to attach to it. We don't need to worry that we're in it sometimes and not in it other times. We will eventually see that samadhi is kind of the essence of wisdom itself. And there is a kind of a base level samadhi that we are always in. But to recognize it, to deepen it, to cultivate it, it's just, let me say it this way. We have to view Buddhist practice in general as a yogic undertaking. That's the roots of it. It comes from a yogic, shamanic tradition rather than an intellectual one. So people for the past Buddhism 2,500 years, probably another 2,000 years before that, were sitting down under trees and experimenting with the body, experimenting with the breath, experimenting with the mind. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? How can I change my experience in using this vessel, the body-mind? Samadhi is just the fruition of that. It's a clearer, more grounded, less self-referential, self-fixated, more true, I would say more true way of experiencing that the practice gives us access to. So for that reason, it's not the end all and the be all, but it's such a ripe field or fertile field within which our Zen cultivation can take place. I guess that's how I would describe it. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I want to stress how important it is. I also want to stress that it is not by itself important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you really answered it. Appreciate it.
I love it when I'm not sure that I answered the question, but someone tells me I did. That makes me very happy.
All right. Thanks, Meido. Thanks, Chappelle. Go for it, Leon.
Roshi, it's wonderful to hear you. Much of the stuff that you have been saying is very familiar to me. I began my practice with Meido Moore Roshi at Zen Center of Los Angeles back in the mid-'80s. So I'm somewhat familiar with some of the things that you are talking about, and it brought back some wonderful memories. So thank you for that. There's a question I want to ask you about my practice in particular. I'm in a situation now where my health does not permit me to visit my teacher very often. And so I have been wondering and playing with the idea of engaging with him across Zoom or by phone, something like that. My trepidation with this is the ritual, if you're familiar with Meido Moore Roshi, it was classic Japanese Zen. So you do your prostrations outside the Dokusan room. Inside the Dokusan room, you sit down and you enter into that common ocean of samadhi that the teacher provides. And it's different, even if I don't say a word in there. The effect is distinct and profound and energizing, and I can get up, even if I haven't asked or answered a question, I can go away. I'm wondering how one deals with that across a Zoom link, and if you have some advice in this area.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I flip-flopped a bit in my view on it. I mean, I have to affirm, and there's no doubt, that being in we say meet space with someone. Right?
Yeah.
And in Zen, we use the word ba. Ba means field, the proximity, the field of someone, especially one's teacher, especially if it's a realized teacher, is unmatched. There are things that can be done and things that can happen in that container that point to why that kind of encounter has been so stressed or was viewed as so important. But that being said, we have to work with our conditions and we have to work with our situations and just do our best as best we can. So if that's the only way you can contact your teacher is that, I would say, of course, you have to do that. You should do that. Dai, a very famous Rinzai master in ancient China, famously did a lot of teaching through letters with people, giving them advice for their practice through letters. So I don't want to say there are limitations to it. I would say it's not ideal, but I'll also say, let me add something to that. It's also not necessarily necessary to see your teacher that often. If you can see that person occasionally, even once a year, it can be enough. It really depends on the person. But so let's return to your question. Now you're going to do kind of Zoom encounter with your teacher. I'm sort of a traditionalist. I know that's my prejudice. So there's a part of me that immediately is suspicious of that and says, well, that's virtual. It's not real. But, all reality is virtual in the truest sense. We cannot say that there's really inherently a limitation there. I think if you bring your sincerity and your own practice cultivation to that encounter with, great intensity, I almost want to say with a certain amount of faith, and if the teacher has that same feeling and meets you with it, and especially if you happen to be close with your teacher, you've practiced together for some time, I can see that there would not be so many limitations or such a lack to worry about in that. I would approach it as if the person were there. I wouldn't get hung up on the fact that it's a screen. I mean, I'm having silly images in my mind of, if I wanted to see my teacher that way, putting the computer on a cushion in a room and doing bows outside the room and then coming in. You can do that. You can still do the bows if the ritual is useful to you.
Yeah, and the ritual is very important to me. The prostrations that I do from the outside begins to set the framework for what happens inside. And I can begin to enter that space. So what I'm thinking is that I need to add to the encounter as much as I can of what I think I'm leaving behind. And I have a very good relationship with my teacher. So
I will never say that there are necessarily limitations to it. Then I think you can find a way to use that. And then when you do have a chance, if you have a chance to see your teacher in person, at least you will feel like you maintained that connection, that there's not lost ground to make up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah, I
thank
wish
you
you the best with
very
that.
much.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage you to do that as much as you can, if it's useful to you.
I am encouraged. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Meido, and thank you very much, Leon. Nice to see you. All right, so I've been asked. It's actually kind of related to the discussion you just had with Leon. I've been asked to just ask you a question on this person's behalf. Very simple. Do you do koan training using Zoom? So it's kind of a sequel to the discussion you just had.
Generally not. Because the format, there are just too many limitations in terms of what can be done. And also, we will then lack the power of that physical proximity. So what I'm saying is I do not take on students for Koan training solely through Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
If someone would like to become a student and do Koan practice with me when they're ready for it, and by the way, Koan practice doesn't suit everyone. Not everyone does or needs to do Koan practice. It's just one tool in the toolbox. When we talk about Rinzai Zen, folks tend to focus on it because it's very interesting. But I have students who will be with me for 10, 20 years who don't do Koan practice because it doesn't fit them. They're doing other methods. Okay. But that being said, I would not take someone on for Koan practice using Zoom alone. But if the person's practices have a certain depth, there can be times where we could connect that way and it would be useful as a way to fill in the gaps like Leon's talking about, I think, in between the possibility of the actual physical encounter.
Mm.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. And I have some students who are doing Koan practice. There's one aspect of Koan practice where you may penetrate a koan to some extent, and then you're asked in the Rinzai tradition to go back through this volume of Zen literature and find some words, phrases, or poem that express your insight. It's a way to learn how to use words, the samadhi of words. So sometimes I'll have a student who lives distant from me who will penetrate something, and I'll say, okay, go look in this work, send me your verse. So, but in that case, we're communicating by email, and that's no problem. I can tell from the choice of the words whether the insight is clear or not. That doesn't necessarily require us to be present with each other. So I guess my answer is a yes and a no. But as I get older and less stubborn and more flexible, I find myself considering things I hadn't considered in the past. I won't say it's a fixed limitation. I'd say there could be possibilities. It depends on the person.
Yeah. As a follow-up to that, this is from me, not from the questioner, but it just seems an opportune moment to ask. Do you take one-on-one students? What does that look like? It sounds like they probably need to be in Wisconsin.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, I mean, anyone's welcome to practice with us. We have online resources, and people are also welcome to come to retreats or any events. But if someone has the feeling that they want to commit to a teacher-student relationship with me or with anyone in the Rinzai tradition, it's a formalized thing. There's a brief ceremony that formalizes it. We call it shokken. And it's not just a commitment to relationship. Let's face it, it's a human relationship, warts and all. So it requires a certain honesty, a certain good communication, just like any successful relationship does. But we view that moment of committing to the teacher as a very important one. And from that moment, I'm responsible for that person's practice. They're responsible to practice and to link themselves onto the lineage. It's the establishment of a closer container.
Yeah.
So it's something anyone can request. If I don't feel I'm a good fit for them, I'll tell them, you should find someone else. But I have students, formal students, who are all over the world. I go to Europe once or twice a year to conduct retreats. I have a large group of students there that I see only once or twice a year. It's enough. It's enough for us to move forward with the practice.
Okay. Yeah. But this isn't a scenario of like, this isn't a scenario of like, oh, come take a lesson or two. This isn't like that. This is
no.
commitment.
Again, anyone's welcome. Someone can come, say someone wants to come to retreats with us, they can come their whole life to retreats with us without making that commitment. And I'll still teach them. I'll still do everything I can for them. If someone wants to enter the gate of the formal practice, do the koan practice deeply, really try to bring the path alive within that teacher-student relationship as we are traditionally told we should do, then at some point they need to find a person that they want to follow. It doesn't mean it's for life. It's not, it's like marriage. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. You can move on if you have to. And sometimes they'll reach a moment where it seems like it's best for them to move on, and that's fine too. But it's important, again, that we commit to the human relationship. It's a way of, it's something that some folks try to avoid, I think, in modern times more than in the past. Part of it is the direction culture has gone. Part of it is that especially if one's not used to that kind of training, to be in that teacher-student relationship and face-to-face with someone that you are responsible for and who is responsible for you. Again, just like any other intimate relationship, it's a mirror. And we don't like to look in that mirror constantly. To be around the teacher is to constantly be faced with your own stuff. Everything you lack, everything you're fearful about, everything that's not strong about you. A good teacher will make the condition for that stuff to be in front of your face constantly. And that's why people don't like to be around teachers that much. We have to go into that cave, face that dragon, because the dragon is us. The teacher is the mirror for us. So that's why it's so important. It's important not to avoid that.
Yeah. It's very, this is not to belittle it. I think that's very profound, but it is also very The Empire Strikes Back of you.
Oh yeah, that moment I was thinking of Luke in the cave, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that came through for sure.
Yeah.
The Vader mask comes off and it's you.
Yes, that's true. Well, George Lucas stole a lot of stuff from us.
No doubt. Most of the good stuff came from, so there is one more question. And we're getting close to 9 p.m. Eastern time, but do you mind if I ask it? It was sent to me to ask to you. This person said, could you ask my question for me? It's pretty direct. So if you want to rephrase it for me, that would be fine. But it's also kind of long, and I don't have like the impromptu editorial skills to rephrase it on the fly. So I'm just going to ask it. It doesn't seem that bad. It doesn't seem that stark or harsh or anything. All right, here we go. You said samadhi can be cultivated in many activities besides meditation. Why wouldn't one then just cultivate the samadhi through doing a purposeful activity? Can't Zen be criticized for failing to bring tangible benefits to the world? As a practitioner, are there any truly essential skills needed for society that are being developed? What does a practitioner really have to show for themselves or for their contribution to society after all these years of practice?
Several questions in there.
Yeah.
It's not that samadhi can be cultivated in any activity. I would not phrase it that way. I would say any activity can be integrated with practice. We have to make every activity our practice, but the most direct, the fastest way to do that, the unmatched way, is with something like Zazen as the basis. That formal dedicated practice is unmatched and really indispensable for most people. Most people, to try to make all so-called activities practice or meditation or samadhi, it's a wonderful idea, but it's almost impossible for them to do without a very solid and very rigorous grounding in meditative praxis. Okay, so that's just the reality of the yogic tradition that Buddhism is. That's what's classically stated, and in my experience, I have to say I agree with that completely. As far as the contribution to society, I mean, okay, I don't want to say you have to be Buddhist to do Zen practice, okay? But I'm a Buddhist, so I can only speak from the standpoint of the Buddhist analysis of the human situation. And from the standpoint of a Buddhist teaching, society itself is not fixable at all. Inherently, samsaric existence will always involve suffering, decay, dissolution, chaos. Even if we arrive at some ideal conditions or situation, they will not last at all. Because human beings are, well, we're pretty deluded. We're pretty depraved. It's not fixable. That doesn't mean we do nothing about it. We do our best. But two things. One is doing our best, whatever action we choose to take according to our beliefs, which may or may not be accurate, and our prejudices, which may or may not be applicable widely, but we stand on them anyway. Whatever actions we choose to try and make things better, we should do so. We should do our best, and we should be prepared to fail. We should accept that we probably will not succeed. And if you can do it with that kind of abandon and lack of attachment to outcome, there's a certain purity and strength which will come into that activity, which will, paradoxically, will give you a greater chance to succeed. That's one thing. The other thing is you have to start with yourself. So if we're concerned about society, but this is a mess, unstable, filled with cravings or not crave, I don't even use the word craving, but damaging attachment, filled with aversion. There's things I like and things I don't like. Filled with lack of clarity, cloudiness. Now, I just described the classic three poisons, the three broad categories of delusion that Buddhism says we all have. If I'm not cleaning that up, at least simultaneously with whatever I'm trying to do to help society or help the people around me, the whole undertaking is flawed from the beginning. Compassion, the kind of compassion which moves us to want to address the suffering of the world and of others, of the people and beings we see around us. If it is not founded upon clear seeing and wisdom, it's a false compassion, and it will likely cause as much damage as not. Likewise, wisdom, if it lacks compassion, that caring and encompassing of others within our practice, we cannot call it the true wisdom. So enlightenment in Zen, in Buddhism in general, actually, is described as a unity of wisdom and compassion. How do I actualize that myself in this body-mind, such that whatever I choose to do to contribute to society, to try to help others, can actually be coming from a true, clear, dare I say, enlightened place? We cannot negate or neglect that side of it. So if, we'd like to clean up the world, if my own house is not clean, there's no way I can do that. That's just the reality. So I will never tell someone they should not do whatever they believe in to try and improve conditions in society and contribute in a way which is useful. At the very least, try to do less harm. Try not to harm. Also impossible, by the way. It's impossible to live without killing something. Even if you're a vegan, it's impossible to eat vegetables that do not involve in their cultivation the death of endless numbers of creatures. We live by consuming life. There's no way to get around that. Walking around on a sidewalk, how many small beings, insects, which Buddhism says are not different than human beings in importance, do we step on inadvertently? Existence means to kill. Existence means that there's a certain amount of suffering. Existence means that beings bump against each other and sometimes harm each other. We cannot ever completely change that. But we can try to lessen our impact. We can try to do our best. We can try to help the people that we can actually give some aid to. We can sometimes realize that just the quality of our existence is what transforms the people around us, not only the things we do. If you deepen the practice profoundly, you can be a person that just by meeting you or having some brief contact with you, someone may feel changed. Someone may feel their burdens lightening or their lack of clarity somehow shifting. We can start to, again, just through the quality of our existence, to transform the people around us. That's another aspect of training that I think is not talked about sufficiently. Our culture is set up to value doing. What can you do? What do you do for a living? What skills have you gained? What can you get? What do you, doing? But the practice is more about the quality of your being. How do you cultivate and refine that? And that has to be, from our standpoint, the basis for effective action in society. So I would like to see an army not just of people trying to improve the conditions of society, but an army of deeply accomplished meditators trying to improve the conditions of society. It would be great to see something like AmeriCorps have, Zen practice as part of its curriculum. Maybe we'll see something like that in the future. That's a good idea. One of you guys should do that to try to make that happen.
Yeah.
But those are my thoughts. I don't know if any of that strikes home or really answers the question. I don't want to sound like I'm copping out, but do your best, fix yourself as best you can. Then whatever seems right to you to help others, do it with all your being and be prepared to fail, because ultimately there's no way to end it.
Mm-hmm.
From a Buddhist standpoint. You may not accept that, and that's okay too, but I can only speak from that standpoint.
Yeah, I can't speak for the questioner, but that really resonated with me. And it seems very much of a piece of the sort of four vows that we've talked about before, right? It's impossible, and I'm still going to try and do it, right? The delusion is inexhaustible, and
And again, from the standpoint of Buddhist teaching, also, this is not your first existence. has been going on endlessly. Every being you encounter has at some point in the infinite past been your mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, pet, who knows, anything.
Accountant.
We're encountering again and again, and it is a process which started before birth and continues post-mortem. And it's endless. It's the same old shit. How do you cut through it? What's the best way to use your life now to cut that chain? That was the question the Buddha addressed, nothing more, but nothing less.
Mm.
And again, it may not be something that appeals or speaks to everyone, but that's what the Zen path is for. Ultimately, you asked me, does Zen, what's the goal of Zen? When I say it's liberation, it means that. And with that, yeah, help the person who needs help that you encounter. Do what you can. Do your best. You're not here for very long. So don't get too grandiose about it. You don't have much time, but do your best. At least don't harm. Try to minimize harm.
What a nice place to end. Meido, thank you so much for being here with us. This was wonderful. Just 2 for 2 with absolute bangers. I hope you'll please come back I hope you'll come join us again in the future. I've once again in the chat pasted some stuff about sit heads, but more importantly, the link to Meido's website and a link for offering dana to Meido. If you found this valuable, and again, I don't think it's to Meido, I think it's to Meido's organization.
It's a not-for-profit, yeah, which sustains our monastery. So we're grateful, but it's not necessary, but we're grateful. And I want to say also, if anyone would like to have contact with me or continue any discussion with me, if you email through that website, it goes to my eyes. So feel free.
There you go. So yeah, dana is an opportunity, I think, in the spirit of that last question of what we can do. Well, supporting and sustaining these teachings, that's one thing that we can do. You might not want that to be the only thing that you do, but if we want people out there with clean, clear minds and wholesome hearts doing the sort of work that needs to be done in society, someone has to teach those people. And so supporting good spiritual teachers is a really beautiful thing to do. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, to offer dana to support these wonderful teachings. That's really it. Before we wrap, any last things that you'd like to say, Meido?
No, I'm grateful for your time and attention today. Thanks so much. And nice to catch a feeling from you guys, even through the screen. It's a very, very nice group tonight.
We appreciate you a lot, Meido. And I want to say to everyone who joined us, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your practice. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.